Alright, today we're going to be talking about rational exponents and radical form. These are some examples of rational exponents. Okay, 10 to the 2/5 power, 4 to the 3/2 power, x to the 4/3 power. The reason it's a rational exponent is because what is your exponent? A fraction. Okay? Now, you also have radical form. See how each of these have a radical? Okay, like you have the 5th root of 10 squared, the square root of 4 cubed, and the cube root of x to the 4th. Now, with the first one, it's pretty obvious why I call it the 5th root, because there's a 5 on the outside. And with this one, I call it cube root, because there is a 3. Why is this one without any number called the square root? When you say squared, what number do you think of? 2. Anytime you have the square root, it's an understood 2. You don't have to write it, it's understood to be there. Okay, does that make sense? Because think about it, guys. What's the square root of 16? 4. Okay, the square root of 16 is 4. And isn't that because 4 squared is 16? Okay, so square root, the reason it's called that is because there's an understood 2. It's root 2. Okay, now another thing is look at the two things. Aren't both of these the same 3 numbers? Okay, so let's type it in. Let's type in 10 raised to the 2/5 power. If you don't know how to type that in, just give me a second till mine comes up and I'll show you. Okay, so the first thing you would have to type in is the 10, of course. To raise it to an exponent, you use the caret button. And then since it's a fraction, you have to do alpha y equals to pull up your n over d, numerator over denominator. And our fraction is 2/5. And so what does that equal? Right, 2.51. Now let's type in this, the 5th root of 10 squared. If you were trying to type in just a square root, couldn't you just hit second and then the square root symbol is right there on your calculator? If you were trying to type in anything bigger than a square root, you have to go to math. There's a thing for cube root, but anything bigger than cube root, you're going to have to use this. But before you do, you have to type the number that's going in that root. So this is the 5th root, so I'm going to type in 5. And then I go to math, go down to number 5, and then see how it put it up there for me? But the number has to be typed in first that you're putting in that root. Now we can type in 10 squared. So 10 squared. Make sure all of it's up under the radical symbol. And don't you get the same thing? The fraction? The root? You go to math and then number 5. Okay, so like you would get the same thing if you typed in 4 to the 3 over 2 or the square root of 4 cubed. That would be the same answer. They're equivalent. They've just been written in 2 different ways. So what we're going to be learning today is how to go from one form to the other. First, we're going to go from rational exponent form to radical form. Okay, you'll notice they have like the formula. Not really a formula, but just the way it works. If you have x raised to the a over b, and you're asked to write it in radical form, the b is your root, and the a is your exponent. So let's use that to try to rearrange this one into radical form. What number is going up under the radical? 4. And what will it be raised to?
2.
The 2nd power. And then the denominator, the number in b place, is always your root. So this is the cube root. Now, say you've rearranged it and you're not sure you did it right. How could you check it to see if you did it right? Calculate it. Like if you type in 4 to the 2/3 and then you type in the cube root of 4 squared, they should be equal. Otherwise, you rearranged it wrong. Okay, so now let's look at this one. What goes in the radical and what is it raised to? And then it's what root? The 4th root. Okay, so for the last one, what goes in the radical and what is it raised to?
5.
5, and then 2. Now, whenever you're dealing with one that's an x, you can't type that in to check it on the calculator. But you could if you substituted a number, like maybe put in a 3 for x here and a 3 for x here, and then see if they're the same, and you'll know if you rearranged it correctly. All right, I want y'all to take like a minute or two and try 1 through 6 by yourself. Okay, everybody try 1 through 6. Okay, Micaiah, what did you get for number 1? Okay, so inside the radical, 4 raised to the first power, and you can write it, but just know that on a test, it would never be there. And then the root is 3, correct. All right, number 2, DeAndre, what'd you get? And then that's in the radical. And then what's the root? 2, but you don't have to write it, it's understood. Okay? Number 3, Trevor, what'd you get? Raised to the what? Well, it's the square root, so the 2 would go there, but you don't have to write it, and the 1 would go here, but you don't have to write that either. Okay, number 4 is a little bit different, because notice how with this one you had a 3 and an x, but we didn't really have to do anything special, because it was raised to the first power. But with this one, the 4 and the x are in parentheses, so both of those numbers are being raised to the 2/3 power, and so since we're going to square it, you've got to put it in parentheses inside, and then cube root. Now, another way you may see this written is the cube root of 4x, and then put that in parentheses, and then put the squared on the outside. Okay, you may see it written either way. Okay, number 5. What goes up under the radical? And what is it raised to? And what's the root? 5. Right. And then number 6, what does it look like? Right, the 5th root of 10. And that 10 is to the first power, but you don't have to write it. Okay, now before we move on to rearranging it the other way, going from radical to rational, I want you to go over to page 7. And I want you to try 1 through 9 odd, just the odds. So it's only 5 problems, 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 on page 7. Okay, so I'll just give you a couple of minutes. Okay, turn back to page 5. Okay, now we're going to go the other way. This time it's been given to you in radical form, and you're going to change it to exponential, or not exponential, rational form. Okay, so they give you the format up here. So what's your base? 7. And then what's going to be the numerator, the 2 or the 5? The 2, and then 5 goes in the denominator. And how could you check to make sure you rearranged it correctly? Put each one, evaluate them, and see if they give you the same value. Okay, what would this one look like? X to the 3/4. And then this one,
3x.
right, in parentheses, to the 1/2. Because isn't there an understood 1 here and an understood 2 here? Okay, take a minute and try 1 through 6. Okay, number 1, what did you get?
5 to the 1/2.
Right, 5 to the 1/2. Number 2, right. Number 3,
6 to the 3/4.
number 4,
Parentheses 2x.
to the what?
1/4.
Right. Number 5, over 2 is correct, because there's an understood 2 out there. And then number 6, right. Pretty easy, right? Okay, turn to page 6. And I want you to try 1 through 9 odd on that page. So just 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9.